Living in the shadows of Project 2025, a hypothetical journey. Introduction. In 2024, I was 25 years old, caught in a whirlwind of political rhetoric and divisive debates. I wavered between the parties for months before the election, swayed by the impassioned speeches and the heated conversations around me. Every day seemed to bring a new perspective, a new argument, and a new reason to lean one way or the other. As the election drew near, a well-meaning friend convinced me to vote Conservative. He painted a vivid picture of the future under Project 2025, promising exciting changes that would revolutionize my life. Imagine a world where traditional values are restored, where America is strong and self-reliant, he said. His words were persuasive, and I was sold on the vision of a brighter, more secure future. Today, looking back to 2025, I see the year when the political landscape of the United States shifted drastically. Project 2025 had seemed to be an exciting, ambitious, and radical conservative initiative. However, once it had taken hold of the nation's governance, it led to sweeping changes across every facet of American life. This is the story of how these changes impacted the lives of ordinary citizens, the resistance they sparked, and the enduring hope for a return to democratic values. Part 1. The Rise of Project 2025. In the early days of 2025, the newly elected Conservative administration quickly implemented Project 2025. Policies were enacted at a dizzying pace, dismantling decades of progressive legislation and reshaping the federal government to reflect a strict conservative ideology. The Environmental Protection Agency was significantly weakened, with climate regulations rolled back to favor industrial interests. Social programs like Medicare and Social Security were privatized, creating uncertainty for millions of Americans. In small-town Ohio, Sarah, a high school teacher, saw her curriculum drastically altered. Science classes were required to teach climate change denial and creationism. Critical thinking and scientific inquiry took a back seat to political agendas. Sarah noticed her students becoming confused and disheartened, questioning the integrity of their education. Many bright minds, once eager to explore and to learn, felt stifled and misled. Sarah herself struggled with the ethical dilemma of adhering to the mandated curriculum while knowing it compromised the quality of education she was passionate about providing. Part 2. Lives under the new regime. John, a diabetic living in Texas, experienced the harsh realities of the new healthcare system. With Medicare privatized, his insulin costs skyrocketed, forcing him to ration his medication. The public outrage grew as stories like John's emerged, showing how the vulnerable were being left behind by policies favoring corporate profit over human well-being. In New York City, Maria, a single mother and immigrant, faced increasing challenges under the new administration's strict immigration laws. Every day she navigated the bustling city streets with a heavy heart, knowing that at any moment she could be detained and torn away from her children. Detention centers, once used sparingly, now expanded rapidly, becoming overcrowded with individuals whose only crime was seeking a better life. Maria, despite working tirelessly to support her family, lived in constant fear of deportation, her dreams of a secure future for her children hanging by a thread. Her children, both US citizens by birth, were not immune to the anxiety that plagued their household. Maria's son Javier often woke up in the middle of the night from nightmares where his mother was taken away. The once lively home, filled with laughter and hope, became overshadowed by the looming threat of separation. Maria's every move was calculated, her every decision weighed against the risk of exposure. But immigration was not the only area where rights were being eroded. Across the country, the LGBTQ+ community found themselves under attack. New laws were passed allowing businesses to refuse services based on religious beliefs. This seemingly innocuous change led to a widespread discrimination and a resurgence of open prejudice. Sam, a gay man living in a small Midwest town, found himself turned away from establishments he'd frequented for years. His favorite bakery refused to make a cake for his wedding, citing the owner's religious convictions. The local pharmacist hesitated to fill his prescription for hormone therapy, causing Sam to feel both humiliated and marginalized in his own community. The impact of these policies spread further. Healthcare providers, emboldened by the new laws, began denying services to transgender individuals. Lisa, a transgender woman in Texas, was refused treatment for a respiratory infection because the doctor claimed it conflicted with his religious beliefs. Forced to travel for hours to find a willing provider, Lisa's health deteriorated as she grappled with a systemic discrimination that left her feeling less than human. Protests erupted in cities nationwide. The once peaceful streets of San Francisco and Chicago turned into battlegrounds as advocates for LGBTQ+ rights, immigrants, and their allies clashed with law enforcement. Police, now armed with military-grade equipment, responded with force, often exacerbating the violence. Families like Maria's watched the news with a sense of dread, knowing that any attempt to fight back could result in further repression. Despite the dangers, communities began to organize. Grassroots movements emerged, uniting people across different backgrounds in their shared struggle for justice. Underground networks formed to protect those most at risk. Safe houses for immigrants, secret clinics for transgender individuals, and legal aid groups sprang up, offering a glimmer of hope in an increasingly hostile environment. However, the government's response was swift and brutal. New surveillance measures were implemented targeting activists and dissenters. Maria's friend Sophia, who had been active in organizing protests, was arrested on dubious charges. Her arrest sent shockwaves through their community, spreading fear and uncertainty. The erosion of rights didn't stop there. Voting rights were also under siege. In Georgia, strict voter ID laws and reduced polling stations disproportionately affected minority communities. John, an African-American veteran, found himself waiting in line for over 6 hours to cast his vote. Many of his neighbors, unable to take time off work, were effectively disenfranchised. Amidst this turmoil, a sense of solidarity began to grow. People realized that their struggles were interconnected. The fight for immigrant rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and voting rights were all part of a larger battle for equality and justice. Community leaders called for unity, urging people to stand together against the tide of oppression. Maria, despite her fears, joined a local support group for immigrant families. Sharing her story and hearing others gave her strength. Together, they organized fundraisers, offered mutual aid, and educated their neighbors about their rights. The fight was far from over, but the seeds of resistance had been sown. My best friend, a vibrant and ambitious woman, found herself in a dire situation. She became pregnant after a traumatic encounter with an ex-boyfriend who had forced himself upon her. Desperate and afraid, she sought help, only to be left in the lurch by a system that denied her her rights. With no legal recourse, she fled to South America to have an abortion, risking her life to escape a country that had turned its back on her. The streets were soon filled with discontent. Riots and marches erupted as people from all walks of life rose up against a system that denied their basic freedoms. I could no longer stand idly by. The remorse of my vote weighed heavily on me, knowing that I had contributed to this oppressive regime. I joined the protests, fighting for the very existence and dignity of myself and others. The economy, once promised to thrive, took a nosedive. Markets crashed and businesses shuttered their doors. Fear and hunger became rampant as resources dwindled and social safety nets were dismantled. Lawlessness spread as people struggled to survive in an increasingly hostile environment. Families were torn apart by the new laws. LGBTQ+ individuals faced unprecedented discrimination, with many forced into hiding or fleeing the country. Immigrants who had lived in the US for decades were deported en masse, leaving behind broken communities and grieving loved ones. A pivotal moment came when a massive protest converged on Washington, D.C. Millions of people marched to the Capitol demanding change. The government responded with force, but the resolve of the protesters only grew stronger. The world watched as Americans stood up against tyranny. As the election approached, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The policies of Project 2025 had shown the world a grim vision of the future. It was a future where the most vulnerable were targeted and basic human rights were eroded. But it was also a future that ignited a fire in the hearts of those who believed in justice. The struggle was long and arduous, but it forged a resilient and united populace. As I look back on my journey, I realized that hope and determination could indeed overcome even the darkest of times. This experience taught me the power of informed decisions and the importance of standing up for what is right. Thank you for listening. Now let's share this. Together, we make a difference.